The 3 best investments for wildlife photography. In my opinion anyways. Guys, I've been doing wildlife photography for over 6 years now, and I have made some investments that I'm pretty happy with, and some investments that I am not very happy with. So let me try and save you a little bit of money and give you 3 of the better investments that I've made in photography, and 3 that I think you should make as well. Number 1, editing software. Now, editing software is something that I think can be overlooked a lot when you're just starting off in wildlife photography or just photography in general. But I also go out in the field and see quite a lot of people with really expensive gear that have been doing photography for a long time, and they just don't edit their photos. Now, I use Lightroom, Photoshop, and Denoise AI, but personally I think you could probably get away when you're starting off just with Lightroom and Photoshop. Adobe does package these as a deal together, which is about $15 Canadian, or roughly $11 USD per month. So it is a monthly subscription. And now this isn't a huge investment. Obviously it's not a small investment. It's almost like paying for a streaming service for your TV. But it is something that is very necessary in my opinion if you are really serious about wildlife photography and if you're serious about getting good images. Now, Denoise AI is, in my opinion, a really good purchase. It's a one-time purchase of $100, and there's a lot of reasons why Denoise AI is great. I've actually made a video on it, so that video will be down in the description. But, it just removes noise from your images, and, Lightroom can do this as well. Lightroom has a great denoiser, and denoising wildlife images is really important. Oftentimes we are shooting wildlife at dawn and dusk when it's obviously not very bright out, and our ISO gets bumped because of that. We're also shooting at very high shutter speeds, which again is going to bump our ISO up, so having those denoise features is very important. But post-processing tools goes far beyond just denoising. When you see an image come straight out of camera, it is typically very flat. In wildlife photography, it's typically very far away. We need to crop a lot of the times to get closer to our wildlife. And when I talk to a lot of beginner photographers, in wildlife photography, but in any kind of photography really, they always ask, I just bought this camera, but why aren't I getting really good images? And it's because you're not editing. Editing is just a very important and necessary step for a lot of photographers. I mean, sure, there might be a couple of photographers that don't edit and get great photos. I'm not one of them. My raw photos are not very good. And a lot of times, if we just look at photography, not necessarily wildlife photography, some people will say, well, my phone takes better pictures than my camera because, right out raw, of course they're not going to look good. And not only is it good for your photos now, but I have gone back to my earliest photos that I didn't edit completely and they weren't that great, and I can bring them back to life now, and they're pretty good photos because you can save so much in post-processing, and that is really truly where photos become great. And without this necessary step, even the best gear is not going to deliver to its full potential. So editing is very important, and editing is a whole video on its own, but Lightroom and Photoshop are excellent, and I think for that $11 USD subscription, it is so worth it. I know that there's a lot of other free ones out there too. I've used like the free version of Lightroom. I've used GIMP, and they're just not that great. I mean, Lightroom and Photoshop are amazing, and if you are really serious about photography, definitely worth that investment. All right, we are on to our second best investment, and that would be a good lens. Now, this could be a telephoto lens if you are interested in, birds and big animals, big wildlife that's typically pretty far away. Or it could be a macro lens if you're more interested in the smaller types of wildlife, like invertebrates, bugs, spiders, but also amphibians like frogs and salamanders and reptiles. But just for the sake of it, we're going to say a very good telephoto lens because that's probably what a lot of you are here for, because I know macro is kind of its own category, but I'm still including it because, bugs and spiders are still wildlife. Now, if you've been doing photography for some time, you probably already know that the lens is far more important than the camera. And if you are very new to photography, well, guess what? The lens is much more important than the camera. So many times I get questions saying, what is the best camera, or, what camera would you recommend for this price, be it on YouTube or be it, through family and friends. And it's just always a second thought about what lens you're gonna get. A lot of people will go out and get a really nice camera, blow their budget on the camera, and then, a lens is a second thought, and they just pick up a lens that is cheap, or one that fits in their budget. And I would go the other way. I would buy my lens first, spend like, I don't know, 60 to 70% of my budget on the lens, and then get a camera that fits into your budget. And I fell into the trap of buying a whole bunch of different lenses when I started off. I had, like probably two different mediocre and not very good telephoto lenses. I had like a 24 to 70. I had like a 24 millimeter, a 35 millimeter, a wide, a macro lens, and none of the good ones. I just tried to get as many of the cheap ones as I could. And, that was a lot of money because I was kind of selling lenses that I wasn't using and getting new ones. And overall, I just wasted a lot of money buying a lot of bad and mediocre lenses. When in reality, I wish I just bought one really good lens. Now, I'm not saying go and spend the money you don't have on a lens, because there are options within different price categories of good lenses. For example, I've talked about the Canon EFS 55 to 250 STM, which is like $100 used. And that is a great lens for the price. So figure out your budget and put that budget towards a good lens first and foremost. And maybe that is that $100 Canon 55 to 250 STM. Maybe it's a $2,000 lens like the Sony 200 to 600. Maybe it's a $20,000 lens like a 600 f4. There is so many different lenses out there for all the different types of cameras and the different brands of cameras. So do your research, find a lens that works for you, and put that money towards one good one. Now, I absolutely recommend you buy used, and that could be from a reputable source online or marketplace. Of course, marketplace, be careful because that's not regulated at all. But places like B&H or Amazon or Henry's, they all do used gear, and you'll save a lot of money that way. And if you do buy used and then you find out you don't like it, you can always sell it, and you're probably not gonna lose that much, particularly on lenses, because lenses hold their value so well. When I switched over to Sony a couple of years back, I bought the Sony 90mm macro for $1,100, and fast forward, I can't remember what it is, like 3 or 4 years, that lens is still $1,100 used. So lenses hold on to their value really well. So if you do buy used and then, somewhere down the line you want to upgrade, or maybe it's just not the lens for you, you can sell it again and you probably won't lose that much money. So definitely recommend you look at buying used. I mean, truthfully, I would rather have the Sony a6000 and the Sony 200 to 600 than, an A9 and a kit lens, right? So the lens is really important. I'm not saying the camera body isn't important, because the camera body is of course important too. Obviously, if you have an a6000 or an A9 with a good lens, the A9 is going to be better, right? So the camera does matter, but the lens just matters a lot more. So think about that. And when you are putting your budget together, just don't forget about the lens and almost think about the lens first. Okay, on to the third best investment, and that is field time and travel. Now, don't click off. I'm not necessarily saying you need to travel across the world to where all these charismatic animals might live. I mean, you definitely can, and you're gonna get great photos. You could spend money traveling close to home, go to parks, protected areas where there's a lot more charismatic animals in your area. It might be, $20 to get in the park, or it might be a parking fee, or you may have to travel maybe 4 hours and maybe camp overnight or something. So it is a little bit of an investment, but if you just go down to your local park, maybe you have a lot of animals there, but I for one don't. So, I do invest in traveling within my area, paying fees at parks where, a lot of those rare animals congregate and hang out. And, maybe go for a 2-3 hour drive, spend that gas money, and invest in traveling around to your local areas. And absolutely, if you got the budget for it, invest in those other trips that are more broad. Maybe you live in a very cold place and you want to travel to Costa Rica or something, somewhere where there's a lot of biodiversity, somewhere where you're going to get a lot of good images. That is really going to help your portfolio, and that's going to help you stand out. So you can think about it in two ways. You can go out and photograph a super rare find or a really rare moment that a lot of people maybe haven't seen, and it doesn't even necessarily have to be that great of a photo, but that is going to hit hard and connect with a lot of people, and that might actually do a lot better than a perfect photo of something that's super common to your area, like a robin or something. Because ultimately, finding rare wildlife or rare moments with those wildlife that people might not see all the time is going to connect with a lot more people, far more than seeing a perfect picture of a robin with the most expensive gear edited well. Now, that doesn't mean you should only photograph those rare animals, because you can also go out and take excellent photos of those more common animals doing rare things. So it's absolutely worth traveling around your area, getting out in the field, and spending that little bit of money to go to those more remote places and finding those more rare wildlife. For example, here's a photo that I took very recently that has actually outperformed a lot of my other work that in my mind are better photos, but just not as rare of a photo. That is a 5-line skink that me and my friends found in a very rare moment where it was actually in its nest with eggs. And we traveled 4 hours away and we actually camped out, so it was a little bit of an investment to find this. And the best part of this is I took this with my iPhone. I didn't even have my camera with me. We just stumbled upon this and all I had was my phone. So I took a picture with my iPhone, and this picture kind of went off in a lot of ways that my other photos have not. And let's compare that photo to this one, which is a red-winged blackbird that I took, with my camera. I think this was actually with the Sigma 100-400 and Sony a7R III. So, pretty intermediate gear, I'd say. Nothing too fancy, but this is a well-composed photo. The background is nice and blurry. The red-winged blackbird just sticks out at you. I think this is a good photo, but ultimately, if you compare this to the iPhone photo, which one do you like better? Drum roll, I bet most of you guys liked that 5-line skink that I took with my iPhone and edited in like Lightroom CC. So think about investing in a little bit of travel. Doesn't need to be across the world. You could go a couple hours from where you live if you live more in a city or more in an urbanized area. Even those more rural areas are going to have things like owls and hawks, which are things people don't see every day that do live in a city. So, considering going out, and of course we want to be respectful. Want to be respectful not only to the wildlife, but if you are going out to those protected areas, be mindful that those parks are protected for a reason. And we do want to be ethical, not just with the wildlife, but also, things like private property and stuff like that. And on that note, that 5-line skink, always good when you do find those reptiles or sometimes amphibians under, things like stones and logs that, we do allow them to leave before putting those stones or logs back. And it's always best to try to put them exactly back the way you found them because, they have the perfect temperature under there that they're going to want to have back, especially if they have eggs. So, do be cognizant and do be mindful that we want to be respectful to these wildlife as well as the parks that you might be visiting. So there you go. Those are my 3 worthwhile investments for wildlife photography. I know the third one is maybe a little unconventional. It's something we don't always think about, but it's so worth it to travel and find that rare wildlife in your area. And just absolutely remember that it is a slow progress when it comes to editing and gear acquisition. You don't have to get everything at once. You don't have to be a great editor the first time you start off. Start building those skills up, start building your own gear up, and, be in it for the long haul. Now, thanks for watching, and get out there and capture some wildlife. And if you enjoy wildlife photography and if you enjoyed this video, click here.